The air outside was damp, the kind of Portland winter night that made you hunch your shoulders even inside a heavy coat. I followed Draven toward the warm glow of the gilded pine. My heels clicked against the wet pavement, each step echoing louder than I wanted it to. This was supposed to be a night of celebration, the evening where his family would finally look at me and see more than the teacher from a modest background who somehow ended up engaged to their son. I had rehearsed my smile in the mirror, checked my dress twice, and touched the silver necklace my late mother left me as if it could give me courage. The doors swung open with a hush, releasing waves of rosemary, roasted meat, and polished oak. Chandeliers glittered above polished tables, and waiters in black vests moved with quiet efficiency. It was the kind of place people in my world saved up for anniversaries, but in Draven's, it was a Tuesday night. The maitre d' greeted him by name, with the easy warmth of someone who had done so many times before. "Your family is already here," he said, motioning toward a private dining room. I smoothed the front of my dress, steadying my breath as Draven guided me in. Inside, laughter already floated down the long table, voices blending in, that way people do when they've known each other for decades. Their glasses sparkled with champagne, their smiles as polished as the silverware. They were waiting, but not for me. My presence was an addition, not the point. I stepped forward with my practiced smile, telling myself I could handle anything. The hostess guided us along the gleaming table draped in ivory linen. Place cards lined each setting, elegant script spelling out names that had been carved into Portland society for generations. My eyes darted toward the seat beside Draven, hoping to see my name. Instead, my card sat at the very end, tucked near the water pitcher and furthest from his mother, Valora. I hesitated for a heartbeat, fingers tightening against Draven's arm. He gave the smallest shrug, whispering, "It's fine. Just go along with it tonight." The distance between where I stood and my seat felt like a gauntlet. Valora sat at the head, pearls catching the chandelier's light, her smile gracious and distant. Isolde, Draven's sister-in-law, leaned close to her, whispering something that drew a quiet chuckle. They didn't glance my way as I approached. "Ah, there you are," Valora said once I reached the chair. Her voice was smooth, practiced. "We thought this arrangement was best. You'll have more room down there." I smiled politely, slipping into my seat. "Of course, thank you." But as the napkin unfurled across my lap, the truth settled in heavier than the fabric. It wasn't about space. It was about place. At the edge, away from their circle, where my presence could be contained. The polite smile stayed fixed on my face, but heat pricked at my neck. Draven sat 2 places away, near his mother, nodding to something his uncle said. He caught my eyes briefly, offered a half smile, then looked back to his plate. His silence spoke volumes. I adjusted the silver necklace at my collarbone and sat tall, telling myself, "Don't let them see you shrink." Champagne was poured, glasses lifted. Valora rose gracefully, her pearls resting against her black dress, her voice filling the room with practiced ease. To family, to legacies, and to new beginnings. Everyone lifted their glasses, a chorus of crystal clinks. I raised mine too, my fingers steady despite the tremor beneath my skin. Valora leaned slightly, her perfume wrapping around me as she smiled toward the table. But her lips curved closer to my ear, her whisper so soft it almost disappeared beneath the laughter. "You're just a womb for grandkids." The words sliced through me, sharper than any raised voice could have been. I froze, the champagne glass cold in my hand. Around me, conversation flowed. Isolde laughed lightly. Draven murmured to his uncle, a fork scraped against porcelain. No one else heard. Then, louder, Valora said, "We're thrilled to welcome her into the family." Polite applause followed, glasses raised again. I forced my lips into a smile, nodded slightly, and let the echo of her whisper burn in my ears. My throat ached, not from champagne but from the humiliation hidden beneath her polished tone. Inside, my mother's words rose from memory. "Don't let anyone define your worth, not even those who think they hold the power." I pressed the necklace against my skin, grounding myself in her voice. "Thank you," I managed aloud, my tone calm. Inside, anger pressed against the cage of my composure. Valora sipped her champagne, her eyes glinting like she had delivered exactly what she intended. The table continued with its rhythm, forks clinking, small talk weaving back and forth, but I saw more than words. Isolde caught my eyes briefly, a faint smirk curving her lips, as if she relished being in on the unspoken rulebook I hadn't been handed. Her smile was a message. We all know your place, even if you don't. Draven sat stiff, his fork pushing food around his plate, his silence as sharp as his mother's whisper. That was the wound I hadn't prepared for, the man I was supposed to marry choosing quiet complicity. At the far end, one of the waiters lingered. His eyes flicked toward me, then away, as if he had noticed something off but knew better than to speak. That fleeting acknowledgement was the only validation I had in that moment. I sat straighter, lips curved in a neutral smile, though my pulse pounded. I reminded myself, you've managed classrooms of 30 restless children. You can sit at this table without flinching. But deep inside, another thought whispered, there will come a point where silence won't protect you. The second course arrived, steaming bowls of soup placed carefully in front of each guest. The aroma of thyme and roasted vegetables filled the room, meant to comfort, meant to please. I stared at mine as though it were another test. Valora's eyes flicked toward me again, brief and deliberate, then back to her plate. Her smile never wavered, her mask intact. I lifted the spoon, though my stomach tightened into knots. The laughter at the table washed around me, distant and hollow. I set the spoon down untouched, fingers curling against the tablecloth. My smile remained fixed, but my thoughts sharpened into a blade. If this was just the beginning, how much further would they go? The waiter slid a steaming bowl in front of me, the fragrant swirl of thyme and roasted vegetables rising with the steam. Under normal circumstances, I would have found comfort in that aroma. It reminded me of quiet winter evenings at home, where I made soup from scratch after long days teaching. But tonight it felt different. The porcelain gleamed, the broth shone golden under the chandelier light, and my spoon sat waiting in polished silver. I wrapped my fingers around the edge of the bowl for a moment, feeling the warmth seep into my skin as though grounding me, yet my stomach refused the invitation. Valora's whisper still clung to my ear, her cutting words about being nothing more than a womb looping like a cruel recording. Around me, the conversation had picked up again, untouched by the tension I felt. Isolde leaned toward Valora, laughing quietly at something shared between them. Her pearl earring glinted when she tilted her head, a tiny signal of complicity. Draven, sitting 2 places away, swirled his wine, nodding at his uncle's story about a business deal. He never once looked my way. I sat there, spoon in hand, repeating to myself, they carry on as if nothing cruel had been said. My pulse throbbed in my neck. I tried to appear calm, but my eyes kept straying to Valora. I noticed hers lingered on my bowl just a second too long, the way one might watch to see if poison took effect. I shifted slightly, trying to relax my shoulders. Then I caught it, the briefest flick of her hand near my soup, like she was adjusting something. My chest tightened. For a moment, I thought maybe I imagined it, but then the shimmer on the broth's surface caught my eye. A faint disturbance, small granules dissolving into gold. Valora turned to me with her perfect smile. Her voice was smooth, almost sweet. Eat up, dear. It's nourishing. The words struck me like a trap, carefully laid. I stared at the bowl, my thoughts racing. Nourishing for whom? I forced myself to steady my face, glancing around to see if anyone else noticed. No one did. My stomach knotted tighter. Vitamins could explain it, perhaps some kind of supplement. But why would she need to do it secretly, in front of everyone, with that calculated sweetness? Draven finally glanced my way, but only briefly. He offered no words, no reassurance. He just looked down again, as though not seeing was easier. A wave of dread rolled through me, followed immediately by anger. It wasn't just her words now. It was her hand in my food, her assumption that she could control what entered my body. I shifted the bowl slightly away, subtle enough to seem natural. When Valora's eyes flicked down, I offered her a polite nod and lifted the spoon as if preparing to taste. I let the spoon touch my lips without taking in a drop. Then I placed it back down, careful and calm, feigning contentment. As the chatter continued, another glass of wine appeared by my elbow. The waiter moved so smoothly I almost didn't notice when Valora's hand extended, shifting my glass with the one beside it. Her motion was practiced, almost rehearsed, like this was something she had done before. "Another toast," Isolde announced, lifting her glass high. "To tradition." The others clinked their glasses with ease, their laughter carrying across the table. Draven joined in, tapping his rim against Isolde's, but still avoided my eyes. I looked down at my replaced glass, unease crawling across my skin. Why are they so intent on controlling what I consume tonight? I recalled a saying I once heard: trust is earned in drops, but lost in buckets. In that moment, the drops I had once given Draven and his family had turned into an empty, leaking bucket. Valora's expression never faltered. She sipped her wine gracefully, looking every bit the matriarch presiding over a perfect family dinner. I lifted the glass toward my lips, then feigned a sudden cough, setting it aside quickly. "I'll just stick with water," I said lightly, masking the tension. My throat was dry, but not from thirst. It was from holding back the words that pressed against me, desperate to escape. The evening pressed on. Plates shifted, courses cleared, voices rising in waves of polite laughter. Outwardly, I held myself composed. Inwardly, my chest felt tight, my mind running circles. Valora's eyes followed me more than once, and Isolde leaned close to her often, whispering like co-conspirators. Draven pretended all was normal. His fork scraped softly against porcelain, his silence more suffocating than the whispers. I repeated to myself like a mantra: "Stay calm, stay sharp, don't let them see you break." Eleanor Roosevelt's words echoed in my head. "No one can make you feel inferior without your consent." I clung to them like armor, layering her strength over mine. I forced my shoulders back, met Valora's gaze when she looked my way, and held it just long enough to show that I had not crumbled. She smirked faintly, her lips curving but never softening, as though acknowledging the silent duel had begun. When dessert was announced, I leaned back slightly, letting the conversations blur. I smiled faintly, set my spoon down untouched. Valora leaned closer, her voice low enough for me alone. Her lips curved into a smile that never touched her eyes. If this is just the beginning, I thought silently, what else is she willing to do? The air around me grew denser the longer I sat there, my spoon resting in its place untouched, the golden broth cooling in front of me. It was as though the entire table had agreed to participate in a performance, each line rehearsed, each gesture choreographed, while I was left standing in the wings without a script. Every laugh, every toast, every polite smile seemed to press down on me like a curtain I couldn't push aside. Draven caught my eye for a brief second when I shifted in my chair, but his gaze slid away before it could anchor. He adjusted his cuff, gave a stiff smile to someone across the table, and went back to pretending everything was perfectly ordinary. It was easier for him to pretend, I realized, than to acknowledge the storm circling right beside him. Valora carried on with her conversation, her laughter floating smoothly into the air. To anyone else, she was the picture of poise. But I felt the invisible barbs beneath her polished tone. Every word she spoke was another thread weaving me tighter into a net I hadn't agreed to. I gripped my spoon, more for control than hunger. My fingers dug into the metal, grounding me in the moment. I feel trapped in a play where everyone else knows their lines but me, I thought, my jaw tight. The room hummed with a rhythm I couldn't join, and in the spaces between laughter, I heard my own heart beating far too loud. Valora cleared her throat just enough to gather attention. Her eyes flicked down the table toward me, her smile still gracious but sharpened now, honed to a point. "A wife who knows her role," she said, voice carrying smoothly, "keeps harmony in the family." The statement hung in the air, heavy, pointed, impossible to ignore. A hush passed through the table before conversations resumed in lower tones, as though they were eager not to get caught on the hook she had just cast. I turned instinctively toward Draven, waiting, pleading silently, for him to meet my gaze, to defend me, to do something that showed I wasn't alone at this table. Instead, his eyes stayed locked on his plate, his fork pressed into his lamb, pushing it around without lifting it. His jaw tightened, but no words escaped. The silence coming from him was louder than Valora's words. My pulse quickened, cheeks warming despite the cool draft creeping in from the doorway. I kept my expression composed, but inside something sharp cracked. It wasn't her cruelty that cut deepest. It was his refusal to shield me from it. "Draven," I whispered, just loud enough for him to hear. He shifted uncomfortably, his napkin clenched tight in his fist, but still he said nothing. Valora's eyes glinted with satisfaction as she reached for her glass. "See? Peace is best kept when each of us understands our place," she continued smoothly, raising her drink as though she'd delivered wisdom worth remembering. The table murmured in vague agreement. I held myself steady, though inside I wanted to scream. When I glanced across the table, I caught Isolde's eyes. Her lips curved upward into the faintest smirk, subtle but sharp, the kind of smile that wasn't meant to be friendly, but to wound. She leaned just slightly toward me, her voice light and feigned in its softness. "Every woman here understands," she said, tilting her head just enough to let her words float down the table. "Don't worry." Her tone was sweet, but her eyes glimmered with a different truth. It wasn't empathy, it was complicity. A few of the guests chuckled nervously, as though her remark had given them permission to laugh, to smooth the rough edge Valora had drawn. Their laughter washed over me, each note another reminder of how easily cruelty could be normalized when dressed in fine clothes and polite conversation. My inner voice sharpened. This wasn't one cruel mother, it was a system built to break women like me. I inhaled, lowered my eyes briefly, and then raised them again, steady, unflinching. Isolde wanted to see me falter, but I wouldn't give her the satisfaction. The smirk lingered on her lips, but when she realized I wasn't bowing under the weight of her words, she turned back to her plate. I sat straighter, silent but resolved, my dignity intact even if bruised. The laughter faded into a rhythm of forks against plates, but my thoughts roared louder with every second. My gaze slid once more to Draven. He sat there, a man I had promised to marry, a man who had promised to protect and love me, silent while his family dismantled me piece by piece. A line of words surfaced in my mind, one I had read years ago and never forgotten. The hottest places in hell are reserved for those who remain neutral in times of moral crisis. I realized with a jolt that Draven's neutrality was no less dangerous than Valora's control. His silence was complicity, and complicity was betrayal. Humiliation began to fade, replaced with clarity. My chest no longer burned with shame, it steadied with resolve. If he won't defend me, I told myself quietly, I'll defend myself. The thought took root, small but fierce, a seed of defiance planted in soil that had been trampled too long. I breathed slowly, my back straightening with each inhale, the tremor in my hands stilled. Valora's laughter rang out again at something her brother said, but this time I didn't flinch. My eyes found hers at the head of the table, and for the first time that night, I didn't look away. Her smile faltered just slightly, confusion flickering in her gaze. She had expected me to crumble. She had expected me to sit there, quiet and grateful for the scraps of belonging. I straightened, shoulders square, my hands resting steady on the tablecloth. If they want a battle, I thought, they'll see I won't fight on my knees. The dinner had stretched into its middle course, but instead of loosening into warmth, the atmosphere grew denser, like air heavy with rain just before a storm. The earlier comments, the smirks, the silence, they all hung in the room, invisible yet tangible. My spoon rested quietly beside my untouched bowl, the porcelain cool now. Around me, the room hummed with conversations that circled in familiar patterns. Valora leaned in, directing the flow with the ease of a conductor. Her words had a way of guiding the entire table into harmony with her intentions. "Family legacy," she began, in the same tone one might use to talk about the weather. Her voice was calm, casual, but her eyes were fixed forward, scanning reactions. Guests tilted their heads toward her, leaning in ever so slightly, the subtle act of bodies showing they were eager to agree. These people, many of whom I barely knew, had no stake in me, but carried a stake in her approval. Their laughter was ready, their smiles complicit. Inside, my chest tightened. I could feel where this was going. They didn't want to celebrate me, or even us as a couple. They wanted me bound. It wasn't about welcoming me, it was about securing me, about reminding me of what role I would be permitted to play. I set my spoon down slowly, the sound deliberate against the linen-covered table. It wasn't defiance exactly, but it was acknowledgement. I was paying attention, and I wasn't going to let the words pass me by without being marked. Isolde straightened, her posture practiced, her poise flawless. She was the perfect one to carry the next strike. "Every Bennett woman has had to do this," she said, her voice smooth as velvet. "It's tradition, really, sacrifice for the family." The word sacrifice lingered. Valora nodded, almost lazily, but her gaze flicked toward me as if to make sure I heard the message clearly. She didn't need to say it herself. Others carried it for her, keeping her hands clean while her meaning landed sharp. Guests nodded approvingly, some even smiling warmly, as if what Isolde had said was noble and self-evident. The clinking of glasses around the table underscored it, soft rings of crystal echoing like chains against my ears. Tradition, I thought bitterly. That's the shield they use. Not for honor, not for memory, but for control. I forced a smile, tilting my head politely. My silence wasn't submission, it was calculation. If they expected me to break into tears or protest, they'd be disappointed. I would not give them the show they wanted. Inside, though, fury rose like heat trapped beneath a lid. My fingers pressed against the silver chain around my neck, grounding me again. My mother had warned me that families with money loved their traditions. She never told me how those traditions could suffocate. Then came the next blow, less sharp, but more humiliating because it came from outside their bloodline. One of the guests, an older man I'd met only once, raised his glass with an easy grin. "Better start buying baby clothes soon, right? You'll need them by Christmas." The laughter that followed rippled across the table, lighthearted for them but crushing for me. Their joy was my humiliation, their camaraderie my reduction to a single purpose. My chest tightened. Still, I kept my shoulders straight, my chin level. Across the table, I glanced at Draven, silently begging him to stop it, to step in. Instead, he laughed faintly, nervous, his eyes darting away from mine. His chuckle was thin, but it was still agreement. The realization cut deep. It wasn't just Valora. It wasn't just Isolde. It wasn't just tradition. It was everyone at that table, laughing at the idea that I was nothing more than a vessel for their jokes. They don't even see me as a person, I thought. I'm a role. A womb, a placeholder in their legacy. The humiliation shifted inside me, no longer sharp, but solid, becoming a kind of clarity. This was the line. I could feel it clearly. On one side, silence. On the other, me. I reached for my water, sipping calmly to hide the fury pressing against my chest. Dignity isn't given, it's taken, I reminded myself. I remembered words from Maya Angelou. When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. Valora had shown me. Isolde had confirmed it. And Draven, with his silence, had shown me exactly who he was when put under pressure. My patience, already frayed, pulled thinner with every word, every smirk, every laugh that rolled across the table. But I also felt something else forming, resolve, a line of steel threading through my spine. If this continued, I told myself, I wouldn't stay silent. I turned my glass slowly, the water inside catching the chandelier's glow, buying myself the time to steady my voice, my eyes, my entire body. Another toast rose, laughter ringing again, clinking of glasses surrounding me. I lifted mine too, but my smile was no longer soft. It was thin, sharp, deliberate. My eyes found Valora's at the head of the table, and I held her gaze unflinching. I didn't need to say the words aloud just yet, but in my mind, they were already formed, waiting like an arrow pulled tight. The next words I speak will not be for their comfort. The moment dessert plates were cleared, I leaned toward Draven and whispered, "Let's step outside for a moment." My voice was calm, but inside I felt like glass about to splinter. He nodded reluctantly, as though he already knew what was coming. We pushed our chairs back quietly, slipping away from the clinking of forks and the murmurs of conversation that swirled around Valora's table like a current I couldn't swim against. The cold Portland air greeted me like a slap as we stepped out into the parking lot. The contrast was sharp. Inside had been suffocating with heat and tension. Outside was brisk, the night air heavy with dampness from the river not far away. The ground shimmered with a sheen of moisture, city lights reflected on wet pavement. Draven shoved his hands into his pockets, shoulders hunched slightly, his gaze darting anywhere but at me. I hugged my arms against myself, not because of the cold, but because of the weight pressing down on my chest. "It's time we stop pretending," I said finally. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. The walls in there aren't just closing in, they're crushing me. From inside, faint laughter drifted out when the door opened briefly for another guest, the sound muffled but cruelly cheerful. That world continued on without me, while I stood out here, staring at the man I had said yes to, wondering if I had made the gravest mistake of my life. "Did you see what your mother did tonight?" I asked, my words slicing the silence between us. Draven shifted his weight, his shoes scraping against the asphalt. His breath fogged in the cold, but his words when they came felt even colder. "She just wants what's best for us," he muttered, voice careful, like he was choosing each word with tweezers. "Don't take it personally." "Not personal?" I stepped closer, my voice low but sharp. "She drugged my soup, Draven." He shook his head quickly, almost too quickly. "You're imagining things. You must have misinterpreted. She didn't mean harm." I stared at him, disbelief crashing into me harder than Valora's whisper had. The betrayal cut deeper because it came from him. The one person who should have stood with me was now standing between me and the truth, choosing to shield her instead. Misinterpreted? My voice trembled, not with weakness, but with anger. She slipped something into my bowl. I watched it dissolve. And you sit here telling me it wasn't meant to hurt? His eyes flickered, the faintest crack in his mask, but he pressed his lips together, retreating into the silence that had become his shield all evening. I wrapped my arms tighter across my chest, my necklace pressing against my skin like a reminder of who I was before this family tried to erase me. The man I said yes to wasn't the man standing in front of me now, I thought bitterly. "If you won't defend me," I pressed, my voice steady despite the sting in my eyes, "then who will?" Draven's jaw tightened. His eyes finally met mine, and there was something raw in them. But it wasn't courage, it was fear. He spoke low, almost hissing. "Don't make me choose between you and my mom." The words landed heavier than any insult Valora had thrown across the dinner table. They were a line drawn, a declaration of loyalty I had dreaded, but had hoped wasn't true. My chest clenched, not from the cold, but from the finality of what he had just revealed. It wasn't just his silence anymore. It was his ultimatum. "You just did," I said quietly. "By saying nothing, you already chose." His face twisted slightly, torn between frustration and shame, but no words came. He had nothing left to say that could undo the truth he had just spoken aloud. Car headlights swept across us as another couple walked to their car, laughter trailing with them, completely unaware of the fracture unraveling a few feet away. The world around us kept moving, but my world had just frozen. I looked at Draven and realized I wasn't standing next to a partner. I was standing next to a boy who never left his mother's shadow. I turned slightly away, fingers reaching instinctively for my necklace. The cool metal steadied me, grounded me in something real and mine. The promise he gave me 2 weeks ago felt like glass now, beautiful, but already cracked. Resolve bloomed quietly, threading through the ache. I would not be silent forever, not for Valora, not for Draven, not for anyone who thought I could be reshaped into a role I never agreed to play. Michelle Obama's words drifted into my mind. Strong men, strong women, stand up for what's right, not what's easy. Draven had chosen easy. He had chosen silence, convenience, inheritance, all over me. I turned back toward him, my eyes clear, even if my heart was raw. "If I have to stand alone, I will," I whispered, the words more to myself than to him. He didn't answer. His silence filled the space between us, heavy and undeniable, louder than any argument could have been. The morning after the dinner, I woke with a heaviness in my chest that refused to lift. I lay still for a while, staring at the ceiling, my body unwilling to move though my mind kept replaying every whisper, every smirk, every silence from the night before. Valora's words dug deeper now that the adrenaline had faded, and Draven's silence screamed louder in memory than it had in the moment. I forced myself out of bed and dressed for school, my routine a kind of armor. In the classroom, the walls lined with artwork from my third graders, I felt a brief sense of safety. Their joy was uncomplicated. They didn't measure me by lineage or wealth. "Morning, Miss Quinn," they chimed as they came in, their voices a chorus of warmth. For a few hours, I lost myself in teaching, guiding a reading circle, correcting math problems, tying shoelaces, laughing at a joke only a child could come up with. But safety proved fragile. My phone buzzed near noon, flashing the principal's name. "Can you step into my office when you have a moment?" The message read. My stomach sank. A summons from the principal rarely meant anything good. The classroom that had felt like sanctuary seconds ago suddenly seemed like a courtroom I was walking out of. I told the teacher's aide I'd be back, and with each step down the hallway, dread tightened its hold. When cruelty follows you home, it's no longer just family, it's war, I thought. The principal's office smelled faintly of coffee and paper. She gestured for me to sit, her expression careful. She folded her hands on the desk before speaking. "I need to make you aware of something," she began. Her tone wasn't accusing, but concerned. "Valora Bennett called the school board this morning. She implied you might be emotionally unfit for teaching, that your recent engagement and personal stress could impact your stability." The words crashed into me, leaving me stunned. "She what?" My voice cracked, but anger steadied it quickly. The principal sighed. "I told the board I've seen nothing but professionalism from you. I made it clear the accusation was baseless. Still, because she raised it, it had to be documented." I sat there frozen, the words emotionally unfit ringing in my ears. My license folder sat on her desk, its presence suddenly symbolic. My livelihood, my purpose, my independence, all being dragged under Valora's reach. "She's trying to break me outside the family too," I said, my voice low but resolute. The principal gave me a look of sympathy, leaning forward slightly. "I don't know the details of your personal life, but I do know this. You're good at your job. Don't let her take that from you." Shock gave way to fury. Fury hardened into determination. If Valora wanted to strike here, at the core of who I was, she would discover I wasn't as pliable as she believed. If they touch my work, they'll see I don't fold. That evening, still simmering, I decided to confide in someone from Draven's side of the family. Maybe, just maybe, one of them would recognize that Valora's control had crossed a line. I sat across from his cousin's wife in their living room, the faint sound of a TV sitcom drifting from the other room where their kids were laughing. I told her everything: the dinner, the soup, the whispers, the glass switched, and now, the attack on my career. "She tried to sabotage my work," I said, my hands clenched in my lap. "This isn't just family drama anymore. This is my life, my future." She exhaled softly, almost a laugh. "You're overreacting. That's just how she is. We've all dealt with it. You learn to let it slide." Her words stunned me. "Overreacting?" I echoed, disbelief flooding me. "She's tough, yes," she continued, her voice patient, as if explaining the weather. "But that's just Valora. She's protective of her family. You'll get used to it." Behind her, her husband chuckled at something on TV, indifferent to the conversation that was tearing through me. In that moment, clarity hit me. Their silence is her shield. They didn't just tolerate her behavior, they enabled it by dismissing its impact. Every laugh in the background felt like dismissal, every shrug a nail in the coffin of accountability. Isolation pressed in, heavier than ever. But with it came something else. Anger sharpened into resolve. Later, alone in my apartment, I replayed the conversations in my mind, each word, each dismissal, each attempt to make me doubt my own reality. They want me to doubt myself so they can keep their world intact, I thought. I sat at my desk, pulled a fresh notebook from the drawer, and opened to the first page. The pen hovered for a second before I began to write. Names, dates, events, every whisper, every smirk, every strike Valora had launched. Martin Luther King Jr.'s words echoed in my mind. Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. Silence had carried me this far, but it would not carry me any further. My vow hardened as ink flowed onto paper. I wouldn't let silence bury me. The notebook sat open, pages waiting to be filled. My heart steadied with each line. This wasn't paranoia, it was documentation. It wasn't desperation, it was preparation. The pen scratched steadily, deliberate, methodical. Each note foreshadowed the retaliation I knew was coming. When I finally closed the journal, the weight in my chest had shifted. Not gone, but transformed. My phone lit up suddenly, vibrating against the wood of the desk. An unknown number glowed across the screen. I stared at it, my pulse steady this time. If they're escalating, I thought, then so will I. 2 nights had passed since the dinner, but the echo of it clung to me like smoke. At school, I smiled and nodded, teaching lessons and guiding little hands to hold pencils correctly. But when I closed the classroom door behind me each afternoon, the mask slipped. I carried home the silence of Draven's refusal to stand with me, the cruel curl of Valora's whisper, the complicit laughter that had followed. That evening, I tried to create some semblance of calm in my apartment. I made tea, folded laundry, and let the faint sound of children's laughter drift up from the street below. Normally, that sound reminded me why I taught, why I endured. Tonight, it reminded me of the chain Valora wanted to wrap around my neck, that my worth to her family began and ended with my ability to produce grandchildren. I curled onto the couch, the mug warm in my hands, letting the television hum quietly in the background, without really watching. For a moment, I pretended the world outside that dinner table still existed for me. Then my phone buzzed, its glow cutting through the dim light of my apartment. An unknown number. My breath caught before I even read the message. Dread rose in me like a tide, certain of what I'd find. The words burned across the screen. If you ever speak of what happened, you'll regret joining this family. I stared at it, rereading it once, then again. My pulse quickened, each beat loud in my ears. There was no more subtlety, no cloak of polite conversation or hidden barbs behind champagne toasts. This wasn't family, it was a warning. The light of the phone illuminated my face in the dark, stark and cold. I whispered aloud, though no one was there to hear me. Regret. The only regret is saying yes. Fear came first, sharp and gut deep, but it twisted quickly into anger and then into clarity. If they were willing to threaten me so openly, then I knew exactly what kind of battle I was in. I set the phone down on the coffee table, my hands trembling just once before stilling. Valora no longer hid. That meant she was growing bolder, certain I wouldn't fight back. That certainty would be her mistake. The following day, Draven called. When I answered, his voice was steady, but too careful. "Mom and I wanted to talk to you," he said. I hesitated. "Together?" "Yes. I'll put her on speaker." I closed my eyes, bracing. A soft click, and then Valora's voice filled the line. Smooth, rehearsed, commanding. "We're paying for the wedding, dear. Don't forget where loyalty belongs." My grip on the phone tightened. "Loyalty?" I repeated, my voice level. Draven chimed in quickly, as though to soften it. "She just means we have responsibilities. It's a family matter." I let the silence stretch before I answered. "No. What she means is that money comes with strings. And I'm not blind enough to ignore them." Valora chuckled lightly, as though I were a child throwing a tantrum. "You'll learn, Marisola. All marriages begin with compromise. Consider this ours." Her words pressed against my chest like shackles, heavy and deliberate. I could see in my mind the spreadsheets Draven had shown me weeks earlier. Budgets, guest lists, deposits already paid. At the time, I thought it was excitement. Now I saw the leash woven into every line item, each expense a reminder that the life we were building had her fingerprints all over it. They don't see me as a partner, I thought bitterly, just an investment. My fury rose hot, but I forced my tone to remain calm, steady, the way I had learned to be in front of a classroom full of children testing my patience. I hear you both loud and clear, I said finally. Valora hummed her approval, as though she had won. Draven murmured, "Good," his relief so transparent it made me ache with disappointment. They thought they had tightened the leash around me, but all they had done was show me where it was tied. That night, I sat at my desk with the laptop open. The wedding budget stared back at me from the screen, lines of numbers that no longer meant joy, but control. I stared at it for a long time, letting the rage ebb into something sharper, something stronger. Alice Walker's words came back to me. The most common way people give up their power is by thinking they don't have any. If Valora thought money could buy me, she was wrong. If Draven thought silence could bind me, he was mistaken. I closed the laptop with deliberate care, the click echoing in the quiet apartment. That sound wasn't surrender. It was decision. I whispered to myself, if they think money binds me, they'll soon see I don't have a price. The fear that had once gripped me was gone. In its place was resolve, firm and cold. But mine. I set my phone face down on the desk and leaned back in my chair, steadying my breath. If they want a war of control, I murmured to the empty room, I'll bring truth as my weapon. The words felt right, heavier than anger, lighter than fear. They settled into me like armor. Then my phone buzzed again, rattling against the desk. Another notification, another unknown number. My heart pounded, but not with dread this time, with readiness. The morning of the brunch arrived gray and cool, a typical Portland winter day. I sat at my kitchen table, a cup of coffee untouched beside me, staring at the manila envelope Kalindra had pressed into my hands just 2 nights earlier. Inside lay the truth, clinical, undeniable. Her lab report confirmed what I already knew, but had needed evidence to prove. The pill dropped into my soup wasn't harmless. It was a controlled hormone drug, flagged with FDA warnings. I ran my fingers over the sealed edge of the envelope. The weight of it was surprisingly light, but in my chest it felt heavier than stone. Truth in my hand felt lighter than fear in my chest. My heartbeat steadied as I tucked it carefully into my purse. I touched the silver necklace at my collarbone, my mother's. I had worn it every day since she passed, a reminder that I came from strength, not weakness. As I stood to leave, I repeated silently, "They won't break me today. Not with whispers, not with money. Not with silence." By the time I reached my car, my hands were no longer trembling. This wasn't fear anymore. It was resolve. Valora's estate rose from the Portland suburbs like a statement carved into marble. The house was immaculate, gleaming floors, oil portraits staring down from paneled walls, servants moving quietly with trays of crystal and silver. Guests gathered in the dining room, their voices low, polished, already aligning themselves with Valora's rhythm. The long table gleamed under chandeliers, polished to perfection. Each place setting gleamed, like armor laid out for war. I entered the room, my heels clicking against marble. Draven glanced at me once, but quickly looked away, his posture stiff, his shoulders square with unease. Valora rose smoothly from her seat, her smile warm for the room, but sharpened for me. "Welcome, darling," she said, her tone velvet. "We're so glad you could join us." Her eyes, however, carried the silent threat I had come to recognize. And her words weren't welcome, they were surveillance. I took my seat at the table, again positioned at the edge, far from the head. The long stretch of polished wood between us reminded me of every barrier they had built since the night of the engagement dinner. Every smile at that table was a knife in disguise. I felt them against my skin, even as I lifted my napkin and placed it gently on my lap. The conversation began light, but the weight of expectation pressed down quickly. Questions about plans, about timelines, about the next generation. Each word another reminder that I wasn't seen, only measured. I pressed my hand against my purse, the envelope inside steadying me. Kalindra's report was my shield. The paper was warm against my hand, my heartbeat syncing with the rhythm of my decision. They tried to poison not just my drink, but my future. The moment came, as I knew it would. Valora's voice rose above the chatter, elegant and deliberate. "A family is only as strong as the children who carry it forward," she said, her eyes sweeping the table before landing squarely on me. "And we're all so very eager for the next step." The words were dressed in civility, but the barb underneath struck its mark. Guests nodded, smiling, their glasses raised in agreement. I inhaled, steadying my breath, and reached into my purse. My fingers brushed the envelope. Fear fluttered once in my stomach, then dissolved as quickly as it came. Courage had taken its place. I slid the envelope free, resting it on the table beside my plate. The sound of paper against wood was soft but carried like a drumbeat in my ears. I waited, letting the silence build, letting their curiosity lean toward me. Finally, I placed my hand on the envelope and pushed it gently forward. My voice came calm, steady, sharper than any shout could have been. "If you're going to drug me," I said, my gaze fixed on Valora, "at least pick something not traceable in a lab." The words dropped into the room like stones into still water. Silence. Forks paused mid-air, glasses suspended, eyes widening. Valora's smile faltered, just slightly, the first visible crack in her armor. Isolde shifted in her chair, her smirk vanishing as she glanced at Valora for guidance. Draven froze completely, his face pale, his mouth opening as though to speak but closing again when no words came. Across the table, a guest coughed nervously, breaking the hush. Whispered voices began to ripple along the length of the table, soft at first, then rising in urgency. "What does she mean?" someone murmured. "A lab?" another whispered. Valora's fingers tightened around her glass, but her hand trembled ever so slightly, and the crystal gave a faint clink against the table. The power had shifted. They all knew it. Valora opened her mouth, ready to smooth it over, ready to weave her next thread of control. But before she could, I slid the lab report across the polished wood. The envelope moved slowly, deliberately, the sound of paper dragging against lacquer louder than the whispers around us. "Now let's see," I said, my voice firm. "Who still dares to laugh?" Eyes turned toward the envelope, toward Valora, toward me. The room that had once pressed me into silence now hung on my words. The silence after I slid the lab report across the table was suffocating. Plates of food sat untouched, steam rising faintly, turning the meal into something grotesque, evidence of battle rather than nourishment. My pulse slowed, steadying, as if the air itself was waiting to see what Valora would say. She tried first with laughter, brittle and too light. "Oh, Marisola," she said, her voice practiced and falsely warm. "Surely this is some misunderstanding." But the crack showed in the way her hand tightened around her glass, her knuckles blanching white. Family members exchanged uneasy glances, shifting in their seats. One uncle cleared his throat and looked away. Another cousin busied herself with a napkin she didn't need to fold. Across from me, Draven's face had gone pale, his jaw tight, lips pressed thin. He looked like a man trying to hold his breath underwater, refusing to surface for air. Shame and relief collided inside me. Shame that I had been treated this way, paraded in front of them like some intruder, and relief that at least now the truth was no longer locked in whispers. I had placed it plainly on the table for all of them to see. I looked at the envelope again, then at the plates sitting like silent jurors. The meal was no longer dinner. It was testimony. I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping against marble. Rising slowly, I let my hands rest flat on the table. My voice came calm, measured. "If this is love, I want no part of it." I slipped the engagement ring from my finger, the emerald-cut diamond that had once symbolized hope. I placed it gently on the glass beside Draven's hand. The clink echoed like a gavel striking, final and undeniable. Draven leaned toward me, his whisper frantic. "Wait, don't do this here." "Here," I answered, my tone unwavering, "is exactly where it should be done." The ache in my chest throbbed, but my dignity stood taller than the pain. Around us, whispers rose, guests murmuring in disbelief. Some looked at me with pity, others with discomfort, but no one spoke against what Valora had done. Silence is my rebellion, I thought. Walking away is my power. As I turned to leave, movement stirred at the far end of the room. The family's photographer, hired for the brunch, began gathering everyone for a group photo. He raised his camera, gesturing for people to gather near the fireplace. Valora's voice rang out, cutting smooth and cold. "Let's take one with just the family." Her words landed heavy. My feet slowed as realization swept over me. They were erasing me, not in theory, not in whispers, but in real time. People shifted obligingly, closing the circle, and I felt the space left behind. The photographer raised his lens, and the flash lit up their faces, all smiling, all pretending the fracture at the table had not just split us apart. The sting was deeper than words could reach. The final insult. But as the flash burned across the room, something inside me shifted. They erased me from the photo, but they couldn't erase my truth. Guests shifted uncomfortably. A few murmured among themselves. Even outsiders, friends of the family, could see the cruelty of excluding me so blatantly. Their silence said everything. This was no misunderstanding. It was deliberate. I walked toward the coat rack, my movement steady, deliberate. I pulled my coat around my shoulders and straightened my posture, every stride stronger than the last. Better to leave a toxic table than beg for a seat, I told myself. The humiliation began to lift, replaced with a strange lightness. My steps grew firmer, the ache in my chest loosening with each movement toward the door. Oprah's words echoed in my memory. You get in life what you have the courage to ask for, and what you have the courage to walk away from. I had asked for love, for respect, for partnership. I hadn't received it. So now I was walking away. That was my courage. That was my victory. I reached for the handle of the front door, the weight of the ring already gone from my hand, the warmth of my mother's necklace against my skin, the only jewelry I needed. Behind me, chairs scraped against the floor, voices rising as the family rearranged itself in my absence. And then I heard it. Draven's voice, trembling, calling after me. "Please don't go." I paused, the cold air seeping in through the crack of the open door. His voice was raw, desperate, but too late. He only found his voice when I was already gone. I stepped forward, pulling the door closed behind me. The invitation arrived folded in heavy cream cardstock, the Bennett crest embossed in gold at the top. Valora's name was written in elegant script, inviting me to her charity gala downtown. I sat at my kitchen table, the card between my fingers, and let out a quiet laugh. This wasn't about charity. This was her attempt to restore her reputation after the disaster at the brunch. I turned the card over once, twice. The paper felt glossy but flimsy, just like her power. She believed that money and society's gaze would wash away the truth I had put on her table. But truth had a way of spreading without effort, leaking through cracks, reaching ears that she couldn't control. I folded the invitation back into its envelope, slipped it into my purse, and stood before the mirror. My reflection looked calmer than I felt. Yet inside, there was no fear anymore, only anticipation. It wasn't just family anymore. Now the city would see her mask crack. The night of the gala shimmered with chandeliers and gowns worth small fortunes. The venue was dripping with excess. Golden drapes, glasses of champagne passed by silent servers. Portland's elite gathered in tight circles, whispering, laughing too loudly. I walked in alone, my black dress simple but dignified. I didn't need to match their glitter. This isn't her audience anymore, I thought as I walked across the marble. It's mine. Before Valora even took the stage, I noticed it, the ripple. Whispers moving through the crowd like wind across a pond. I caught snatches as I passed by groups of donors, their voices too curious, too sharp to ignore. "Did you hear about the pill incident?" one woman said, her diamond earrings catching the light. Another man leaned in, lowering his voice just slightly. "It's all over the school board. People are furious. They say she tried to—" He stopped himself as his eyes flicked toward me. Recognition lit his face. I didn't pause. I didn't need to. My truth was spreading without me lifting a finger. Vindication warmed me in a way champagne never could. Draven stood off to the side, pale and restless, trying to hush conversations, his hands fidgeting with his tie. He looked like a man watching a dam crack, powerless to stop the flood. His eyes caught mine once, but instead of guilt or anger, I saw resignation. He knew he could not cover for her anymore. The whispers quickened, wildfire in a room designed for order. Valora floated into the hall like a queen reclaiming her throne, her gown deep emerald, her pearls heavy around her neck. She smiled, gracious as ever, ignoring the murmurs. But I could see it in the tightness of her shoulders. She heard them too. She took the stage with perfect poise. The microphone caught her voice, smooth and polished. "Friends, thank you for gathering tonight for a cause that matters to all of us." But her words skimmed across the surface of a restless crowd. In the middle of her speech, a sponsor, an older man with silver hair and sharp eyes, rose from his seat and walked to the edge of the stage. He bent close to her ear, and though his voice was low, I could see the shift in her face. "We can't associate with this scandal," he said, and then stepped back. The room stilled. Valora's mask cracked. Her eyes darted. Her hand trembled as she reached for her champagne glass, the stem rattling audibly against the table before she steadied it. Guests leaned back subtly, their bodies speaking before their mouths could. One woman whispered, "She's finished." Another shook her head, murmuring, "I knew something was wrong." Valora's empire wasn't crumbling in silence. It was collapsing under the same public gaze she had once used to humiliate me. Her words faltered mid-sentence, her confidence bleeding out in front of everyone. People she had once commanded now edged away, distancing themselves, unwilling to be caught in her fall. The room was unraveling fast, and all I had to do was watch. I stood near the back of the hall, not gloating, not smiling, just steady. My glass of water rested in my hand, untouched. I didn't need to revel in her destruction. I only needed to bear witness. I didn't have to destroy her, I thought quietly. She destroyed herself with her greed for control. Abraham Lincoln's words rose in my memory. "Nearly all men can stand adversity, but if you want to test a man's character, give him power." Power had tested Valora, and she had failed spectacularly. I let out a slow breath, calm and resolved. The truth had done its work. I didn't need to raise my voice. As I turned to leave the gala, I caught Draven's eyes across the room. His face was pale, stricken with something that looked like regret. His mouth opened slightly as though he might call out, but no sound followed. I held his gaze for a moment, then let it go. His silence had built her empire. Now he would watch it burn. I walked out into the cool Portland night, the air crisp and freeing against my skin. The quiet of my apartment after the chaos of the gala was almost unbearable. For days, I had been bracing myself for confrontation, for whispers, for another strike from Valora's arsenal. But now, silence hung in every corner, a reminder that the battle was shifting. On my dresser sat the velvet box that once held my engagement ring. It was empty, the outline in the satin cushion a ghost of a promise already broken. I stared at it every morning, as if it might explain how something so full of hope had turned so hollow so quickly. I thought the hardest part was leaving. I had believed that once I stepped away, strength would come, and healing would follow. But the truth was harder. Leaving had been the easiest part. It was everything after that. The quiet nights, the memories that sneaked in uninvited, the echoes of Draven's voice begging me not to go. That pressed hardest. His voice was a haunting refrain in my mind. "Please, don't go." The irony still burned. He had stayed silent when his silence mattered most, and he only found words when my back was already turned. I touched my necklace, the chain cool against my skin, and whispered to myself. He found his voice only when I was gone. Reflection became my companion in those days. I sat with my journal, rereading the pages I had filled in the weeks before. Every slight, every manipulation, every calculated silence. Draven's betrayal stood out clearest. His silence wasn't passive, it was active, an act of allegiance to his mother. I thought back to the night outside the restaurant, the way his words had fallen sharp between us. Don't make me choose between you and my mom. That sentence had replayed in my head, again and again, but now I heard it differently. Back then, it had shattered me. Now, with distance, I could see its truth more clearly. He had already chosen. His silence built her empire brick by brick. My defiance had been the only crack that let light through. I read over the words I had written in my journal, each one a testimony to myself. It wasn't just a record of pain anymore, it was evidence of survival. I realized those notes weren't about proving anything to anyone else. They were for me, proof that I hadn't imagined it, proof that I had endured. As I closed the book, I whispered, "His silence built her empire. My defiance broke it." A week after the gala, I took a walk through downtown Portland. The air was sharp, winter crisp, filling my lungs with something that felt like renewal. People bustled past, their scarves wrapped high, coffee cups in hand, conversations spilling into the cold air. I wasn't part of their stories, but for the first time in months, I felt like I was part of life again. I stopped in front of a bookstore window, rows of novels displayed behind glass. My reflection looked back at me, layered among stories written by others. For a moment, I studied myself as though I were just another story waiting to be told. Maya Angelou's words drifted into my mind. I can be changed by what happens to me, but I refuse to be reduced by it. I breathed in deeply, the air cold but bracing. I said quietly to my reflection, "I am not a womb. I am not a pawn. I am me." The truth of it resonated through me, stronger than the sting of any insult. Loss had carved into me, but it had also created space. Pain had been my soil, but growth was pushing through the cracks. I pressed my hand against the glass, meeting my own gaze. For the first time in too long, I believed it. Back at my apartment, I began sketching out plans to move. I couldn't keep living surrounded by shadows of the Bennetts. Every corner of my place reminded me of Draven's visits, of the life I thought we were building. It was time to cut those threads. I sorted through boxes, setting aside what I would take, what I would leave. It was daunting, yes, but liberating too. Freedom always came with uncertainty, but it tasted sweeter than the bitter control I had swallowed for too long. I took my mother's necklace in my hand, pressing it to my heart. Her voice seemed to echo in me still, a memory carried in silver. "Don't let anyone decide your worth." I smiled faintly. I wasn't letting anyone decide it anymore. There's a saying I had heard once, from a fellow teacher after her own divorce. Sometimes you don't get closure, you just move on. I understood it now. Closure wasn't something Valora could give me. It wasn't something Draven could offer with his regret. It was something I would create with every step forward. That evening, after I had stacked boxes by the door and poured myself a glass of water, there was a knock at my apartment door. I opened it to find no one standing there, only an envelope slipped beneath the frame. The handwriting on the front stopped me cold, familiar, practiced, from someone I knew well. My breath caught as I bent to pick it up. I turned it over in my hands, my heart steady now, not racing. Even in silence, their reach tries to follow me, I thought. I set the letter on the table beside me, the lamp casting its glow across the handwriting. Whatever truth it held, whatever manipulation or apology it attempted, I wasn't afraid to open it anymore. The envelope sat on my kitchen table, its edges crisp, the handwriting unmistakably his. I traced the loops of the letters, the practiced steadiness of Draven's script. Even the way he wrote my name felt cautious, as if he were already apologizing before I opened it. For a long time, I didn't. I let it rest there while the kettle hissed, while the light from the window shifted across the room, while I told myself that a letter couldn't undo years of silence. When I finally unfolded the paper, the words spilled in careful lines. "Marisola, I'm sorry. I should have spoken sooner. I should have defended you. I didn't. Without you, I feel like I have nothing left. Please, don't shut me out forever. We can rebuild. My mother's power is fading. Things will be different now. Please, meet me one last time." I sat back, the page trembling slightly in my hands. For a flicker of a moment, temptation brushed against me. The thought of softening, of believing that regret meant change. But anger was quicker. Anger and memory. His handwriting looked like the man himself, trapped under his mother's shadow, never standing fully upright. I laid the letter flat and whispered, "Regret is not change. Silence is not love." I slid the paper back into its envelope. My hands were steady this time. We agreed to meet at a cafe downtown, the kind of neutral place where once we might have shared easy laughter. Now, the sound of steaming milk and clinking mugs was a backdrop for something else entirely. He was already there when I arrived, his suit too formal for the casual setting, as if he thought dressing up could patch over everything else. His eyes lit when he saw me, but I felt nothing move inside me. "Without you," he said almost immediately, voice low but urgent. "I have nothing." I took my seat, folding my hands calmly on the table. "Without a spine," I said, looking him directly in the eye. "You never had me." The words landed heavy between us. He flinched, then tried again. "Valora's empire is crumbling. People are turning on her. We can start fresh, just you and me." I glanced down at the coffee mug placed in front of me. Steam curled upward, then thinned, fading. It mirrored what I felt between us, something once hot, now cooling quickly. "Fresh," I said, my voice steady, "doesn't grow from poisoned soil." His mouth opened, closed. He looked younger then, lost, as if he were a boy again waiting for his mother to tell him what to do. My heart ached, not with longing, but with recognition of what I had refused to see. He wasn't my partner, he was her shadow. I let the silence stretch before reaching into my bag. I placed a sealed envelope on the table, pushing it gently toward him. His eyes flickered with confusion. "What's this?" he asked. "Documentation," I said evenly. "Every call she made to the school board, every text, every attempt to sabotage my life outside your family." My journal turned into evidence. He didn't touch it, his hand hovering near but not quite daring. "You can use it against her," I continued, my voice unwavering. "Or you can throw it away like you threw me away. Either way, I walk free." His lips parted, but no words came. The cafe noise carried on around us, indifferent. For once, I felt no urgency, no need for him to answer. The tables had turned, and I was the one holding power now. Not him, not Valora, me. Inside my chest, something loosened. The best revenge wasn't shouting, I thought. It was walking away, holding the truth. He reached for the envelope then, fingers brushing its edge. I stood before he could look at me again. The bell over the cafe door chimed as I pushed it open. Outside, the Portland air was brisk, the clouds beginning to part just enough for sunlight to break through. It touched the wet pavement, turning gray into silver. I walked slowly, deliberately, each step lighter than the last. There was sadness, yes, sadness for what might have been, sadness for the boy who never grew into a man. But there was pride, too, pride that I had chosen dignity over comfort, truth over silence. I lifted my chin, letting the sunlight catch my face. Paulo Coelho's words echoed in me. Sometimes the most courageous act is to walk away. And I had. Freedom didn't feel like fireworks or applause. It felt like steady breath, like the quiet certainty of knowing I belonged wholly to myself. I hadn't just escaped Valora. I had found myself. That night, I sat by my window, the city humming softly below. I held my journal in my lap, but didn't write. Instead, I looked out at the lights blinking across Portland and thought of every woman who had been silenced, controlled, erased. "This is not a story of loss," I said aloud, my voice steady in the stillness. "It's a story of freedom, and freedom is worth everything." I closed my eyes, letting the words root themselves in me. For the first time in years, I felt whole,